I'm here with Rich Volt, Associate Director for the Illinois Association of School Administrators, and we're here just to talk about rules and regs and Part 50 as it's come up in teacher evaluation. So Rich, in talking about the importance of teacher evaluation, I keep hearing about Part 50 rules and regs and how important it is to know about Part 50. What does that mean?
Yeah, Part 50 are the rules that the State Board of Education adopted as a result of the change in law for teacher and principal evaluation. So it's always good to go back and look at the rules when you're thinking about whatever aspect in education you're dealing with. So with teacher and principal evaluation, the source for this information is the Part 50 rules, which you can find on the ISBE website.
So I understand with Part 50, I know that there are kind of two components to a teacher evaluation. What does that look like? How do you break this up?
Yeah, so we have the law calls for two parts of teacher evaluation, and this was the real change from what occurred in the past. So we have the practice part, which is the actual teaching that's happening in the classroom, and then what was added to it with this Part 50 rules is a student growth component. So the student growth component has to be a part of the teacher's final summative evaluation rating.
So let's start with that. Let's start a little bit with the kind of the unfamiliar and the student growth component. What's rolled up in the student growth component, and how do we get to those decisions about student growth?
Right. So part of the Part 50 rules would have been described for school districts how they were going to arrive at these rules. And what was really interesting about this new law is it was a joint committee between administrators and teachers that determined how the school district would handle teacher evaluation. Now, this is really different from past looks at teacher evaluation, because in the past, teacher evaluation was mainly an administrative task, and it didn't include really teacher input. Now, maybe some districts had teacher input, but this requires an equal number of teachers and administrators to come together to discuss what they have to do in relation to the law, and then they have to develop this plan in unison. And if they couldn't develop the plan, then the Part 50 rules said then you would go to what's called the default plan or the state plan. So most school districts have already gone through this entire process, and any new administrator who, for example, would be taking this training is really going to be looking at the joint committee decisions that have already been made. So that's what you need to be informed about. Like, what did your district decide for practice, and what did your district decide for student growth?
So when I'm coming into a district as a new administrator, one of the first questions I want to ask is, can I see your plan?
Right, exactly.
Right? So then I know what it is I need to look for, or what the guidance is around. Okay. All right. So one of the things when we're talking about student growth, I know that seem to create, some confusion and some questions are these assessment types. Can you tell me a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, sure. The law states that you have to use two assessment types. So one assessment would be a standardized test. A second type of assessment would be like a group-made test. A lot of high schools do this with common exams, for example. And a third one would be a teacher-made assessment, which they're calling a student learner objective, or an SLO. So the state required having two assessments where appropriate. Two assessments had to be used for the teacher on the student growth side. And that's the part that will be described in your own joint committee plan in your district. So you'll be able to, as a new administrator, you should read that plan and see how your district is incorporating student growth into the teacher evaluation score. Now, the state required that at a minimum 30% of the score had to be, the teacher rating score had to be student growth, and at a maximum it would be 50%. So again, that would be described in your joint committee plan.
So then after I look at the student growth and understand the plan around student growth, the other piece that we talked about is professional practice. So when I'm evaluating teacher practice, what do I need to know as I go in and think about the teacher practice part and what's in Part 50?
Right. So minimally, they describe the minimal requirements for teacher evaluation in Part 50, which, by the way, I would recommend that administrators do more than the minimum. But the minimum requirements now, which are different from whatever's happened probably in the past, is that tenure teachers, it's once every 2 years. That's the same it was in the past. And then non-tenure teachers, it would be once every year for the 4 years they're non-tenured. The difference is we have informal now observations that are required as part of the process. So a tenure teacher, for example, is required to have one informal observation and one formal observation at a minimum. And for non-tenure teacher, it's one informal and two formals for non-tenure teachers.
So I think the other piece that creates a lot of questions is kind of the final rating. When do I make those decisions? How do I give teachers a final rating, and how's all that decided? Has the state decided that for us?
Well, the state's given some guidelines in the final rating of the teacher, and then your joint committee plan, again, is going to describe that in detail. So the state is saying, again, because some of it has to be student growth and some of it is practice, it's on that 30% at a minimum for student growth and 50% at a maximum. So then how you do that is a little bit prescribed in the state law, but really is prescribed in your joint committee plan. And then how you put those two together, for example, on the practice score, most districts in Illinois have adopted the Danielson frameworks. So some districts count some of all 22 components within the Danielson system. Some just count the 4 domains within the system, and they would have certain like scoring rules. And so you'd have to look at your own plan to see how the scoring takes place. And the same with student growth. Based on how the district is doing it, maybe 15% would be an assessment 1 type, and 15%, so that'd be half of the 30%, would be an assessment 3 type. So your joint committee plan, again, will prescribe that for you. And it's really kind of in a rule format for your own school district.
So I'm hearing for sure that it's very, very important that I know a lot about Part 50 and understand what the rules are and the guidelines according to the law, but also as a new administrator, I definitely need to come in and study and know exactly what's in my evaluation plan.
Yeah, it's much more important to know with the joint committee evaluation plan than it would be the Part 50 rules, because we would assume that the people who did the plan did it according to the rules when they had to do the plan. So you really need to follow your joint committee evaluation plan. And then there'll be some state mandated things. For example, it's got to be communicated to all teachers by the first day that students are in school of the school year. There is some best practices, for example, on student growth. The timing of when you would set the growth, and then having some kind of a midpoint analysis on that growth, and then the final summative of when the growth score would be determined is going to be defined in your plan, and you're going to need to review that. And the practice scores, similarly, again, the plan will describe how you're going to do it, whether it's by preponderance of evidence, whether it's using math, however they come up with the final score. Again, that's all going to be defined in your actual plan. The important part of this is that administrators for sure do the minimum number of observations that are required for teachers. And then more importantly, we hope they would do more than the minimum. And then the purpose of teacher evaluation should really be to improve the performance of the teacher. It shouldn't be totally around the score. So if you look at it from that perspective, having reflective conversations with teachers where teachers improve their own practice is really the best thing we want to happen with teacher evaluation.
Absolutely. I think both of you and I sitting on the committee since 2010, since this law passed, and really the intent always being growing and developing teachers and supporting teachers, not just meeting a requirement.
Right.
But also at the same time, it being very, very important to know what those requirements are so that you don't do less than what's required of you.
Yeah, exactly. And then unfortunately, if you would ever have a teacher, for example, that you'd have to put on needs improvement or unsatisfactory, there's also legal requirements through the plan that have to be met for that to be done correctly. So, for example, putting a needs improvement rating on a teacher automatically kicks in a professional development plan that has to be developed, and then even more requirements if you rated a teacher as unsatisfactory, sets in some legal guidelines of the rights and responsibilities the teacher has throughout the plan that you're going to have to make sure that you're adhering to. And we hope that those are very minimally involved in your evaluation. We would hope most teachers are at the proficient level, and then we really want teachers to be working to be excellent teachers.
So you mentioned the evaluation ratings again, which I know is required by law, specific ratings, and getting to those. You want to just talk about those?
Yeah, so there are, and this is a big change in the law. So earlier, before this law was enacted, we had 3 ratings, and now we've gone to 4 ratings, which has been a big issue as we've gone into the new teacher evaluation system. So now we have excellent as the highest rating, then proficient, then needs improvement, and then unsatisfactory. So how I kind of describe it, in the old system, we just had excellent, satisfactory, unsatisfactory. And a lot of teachers were receiving excellent ratings, and there really wasn't a rubric or a standard that we were using to do that. Well, in this new system, there is a rubric that the Joint Committee has decided to use, and the rubric explicitly states the standards that teachers have to meet in order to be excellent or proficient. And so when you're doing the evaluation, you'd be looking specifically at the rubric, and so would be the teacher hopefully is looking at that same rubric. And so you're coming into a decision-making process of exactly according to the rubric, how is the teacher performing? And then it should be a clear indication of what the teacher needs to do to improve their performance. So, for example, if a teacher is at the proficient level, all you have to do is look over on the rubric at the excellent level and see what is the requirement for me to be excellent. And in the Danielson system, it's really about students doing more of the work than the teacher doing most of the work. So that's what administrators should be looking for, and that's what teachers should be doing in classrooms, because we know that the learner has to be involved in their own learning. I remember Danielson saying this, and it stuck with me forever, that school is not a spectator sport. In school, you have to participate, you have to perform in order to learn. So that's what we're trying to get teachers to do.
Are there any other really important pieces in Part 50 that we want to make sure, that people go to, review, study, know about before you're out there evaluating?
Yeah, I think the minimal notification requirements, for example, that make sure at the building level that you're meeting the minimal requirements by law, that the teachers need to have the notice requirements. If you put a teacher on needs improvement or unsatisfactory, what is that? What kind of requirements does that kick in? That you're meeting maybe the state didn't decide when these evaluations had to be completed. Many districts do complete the evaluation in a February-March timeline because there's some reporting requirements around tenure. And then that forces an administrator in a way to get the work done, not using the full school year. But as an administrator, you ought to think about that. Well, if I have to have everything in by March 1, what am I doing in March, April, and May? Can I start my informal observations for the next year? Can I start formal observations for the next year? And you just got to make sure that the reporting requirements are met from the state and the plan level, and then you have to fit your work in around those requirements.